Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's seminar. My name is Peter Brukner. I'm the founder of Defeat Diabetes, and I'm delighted you could all join us tonight. We've got a big topic to unpack tonight: fibre. For decades, been promoted as essential for gut health, digestion, good health, just about everything else. But is the science really that clear? So to help us dig into that, I'm joined by Zoë Harcombe, renowned nutrition researcher, author, someone who's made a career out of challenging outdated and misleading dietary guidelines. So he's written extensively on topics like saturated fat, cholesterol, fibre, public health policy. And tonight she's going to help us separate fact from fiction when it comes to fibre. At Defeat Diabetes, we believe that good health starts with real food and real evidence. And that's exactly what tonight is all about. So get comfortable. We're going to explore some myths, challenge some assumptions, and hopefully give you a few aha moments along the way. So Zoë, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Hello, Australia.
Right, thanks for joining us. It's fantastic. Zoë, we always start the same way by getting our guests to tell us their story, because you weren't always a nutrition researcher, were you?
I wasn't. Right, potted history. First interest in food probably started when my brother was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when we were both teenagers. And that kind of gave me a brutal introduction to carbohydrate, sugar, insulin, injecting your big brother. Then went to Cambridge University. I'm a mathematician by background, love numbers, love analysing things. And I guess at the time I left and then started what my mum would call a proper job, worked in management consultancy. I then moved into big food. I moved into Mars, the corporation, the candy bars. Yeah, but I've seen it from the inside. I was then headhunted by SmithKline Beecham, which became GlaxoSmithKline. At about the time I was there. So I moved from big food to big pharma. And at about this time, kind of in parallel, I became quite fascinated by obesity because probably similar to you, Peter, we can remember back to when we were at school and there was one overweight child in the class. And my mother stayed as a primary school teacher. So when I would pop into school just to see mum, you couldn't help but notice there were more than one and then quite a few and then double figures. And it just sort of, while I was having this career, this was sort of happening in parallel. So I became really interested in why is it we started getting this obesity epidemic. I then left the corporate world around 2009. I got the opportunity to basically follow my passion, which is to understand more about diet and health. So I thought, okay, I'll try and have a second career, see if I can earn a living in some way, not as well as obviously working at the top of corporate level at the global on the global arena, but can I do well enough? And sure enough, that has proved to be a good second career over the last few years. So I've been looking very much at diet and health. As you say, I've written a number of books. I then did a PhD between 2012 and 2016. And the PhD was essentially asking, is there an evidence base for the dietary guidelines that were introduced? Because from what I could see, the dietary guidelines were one of the triggers before the obesity epidemic. Now, if somebody wants to put together a better explanation for why obesity, diabetes, chronic disease has exploded, I'm all ears. But believe me, this one fits. So that brings us up to today. What do I do now? I read, write, and talk about diet and health. And as you say, I tend to debunk the narrative. So I'm definitely on the critical side of anything that comes out from public health advice. So that's me.
Right. Well, I have contact with Zoë every Monday, because every Monday night into my inbox comes Zoë's weekly blog, which is always fascinating. And I have a very dull life, so it's the highlight of my week, Zoë, is receiving your Monday night blog. It's probably Monday morning your time, but this week's one was on statins. It was fascinating. So what Zoë does better than anyone that I know is look into the science and then critically analyze the science. So that's what we're going to do with fibre tonight. So let's get the ball rolling. Let's start with, what is fibre?
Yeah, great question. We're going to do a really quick carbohydrate 101 to answer that, because people don't always realize what carbohydrate is. So Within the category of carbohydrate, we've got what we call monosaccharides. Mono means one, saccharide means sugar. So that's single sugars. And we know those as glucose, fructose, and galactose. We then have disaccharides, and they are two sugars. And immediately you should start associating the word sugar with carbohydrate, because that's all that carbohydrate is. So our disaccharides are sucrose, what we know as table sugar, lactose, what we know as the sugar in milk, and galactose, which is much less well known, but it is also a disaccharide. We then move on to polysaccharides, many sugars, and we have polysaccharides of the digestible form, which is glycogen in humans and it's starch in plant foods. And we then have polysaccharides of the indigestible kind, and they are categorized into soluble and insoluble kinds, and that is fibre. So fibre is many sugars that are indigestible, polysaccharides of the indigestible version, either soluble as in bran or insoluble as in bran, or soluble as in beans, for example, or oats. But that is fibre. And immediately you should start thinking, why would I want many sugars of the indigestible kind?
Okay, so you're suggesting maybe fibre is not fantastic, whereas we've been told for, I don't know, what, 30, since Burkett, really, what, 30, 40 years, that fibre is essential. It's important for regular bowel movements. It's important to preventing bowel disease, preventing bowel cancer. And yet, is there any evidence for that?
Okay, Dennis Burkett featured in the 1900s. I think he lived from about 1913 for about 80 years. He became known as Fibre Man. There are actually people before him, and we need to pay tribute to somebody who I know you've had on recently, Belinda Fettke, wife of Dr. Gary Fettke. I was aware, for example, of the influence of Kellogg on the whole fibre story. But what Belinda brought to the table was it wasn't just Kellogg. So we'll go back to the 1700s, where you've got Sylvester Graham, and think Graham's crackers. So one of the carbohydrates that was starting to be pushed back as far as the 1700s. You then move into the 1800s, and this is where Belinda pieced together the Seventh-day Adventist movement, Ellen G. White. So Sylvester Graham and Ellen G. White were very much religious Puritans, and they favoured a plant-based diet, and they thought that eating anything animal encouraged wickedness and lust and impure thoughts, particularly in men. So their solution was to move you men away from any animal foods, because that would increase your testosterone, libido, and whatever. So we can't be having any of that. And poor Kellogg, Kellogg was around in the sort of later 1800s. At the age of 12, apparently, he had to translate or transcribe Ellen G. White's, or edit or something, Ellen G. White's book. So this poor influential young child picked up all this nonsense about impurity and plant-based diets. And then, of course, Kellogg, we know incredibly well as Kellogg's, the cereal company. So this is very much embedded in religious zealotry, huge cereal companies. So over in Australia, you've got Sanitarium. And of course, it's massively beneficial for the cereal companies for us to believe that we need fibre. And of course, if you look at studies that have been done saying breakfast is the most important meal of the day, they invariably have conflicts with the cereal industry, because it's in their interest that we think of having breakfast. And of course, it's in their interest that we have cereal for breakfast rather than eggs or yogurt. So there's a very strong religious connection. There's a very strong cereal connection, but the heritage of where we picked up this idea about eating fibre will come into the evidence, I think, in another question. But the background is very much a fabrication.
Yeah, I always love this. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. As if that's sort of some scientific fact, and all it is, as I believe, is just a marketing tool, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and yet people espouse it all the time. So let's start with what fibre is supposed to do. As far as bowel regularity, bowel movements, preventing constipation. If you don't have enough fibre, that's when you get constipated, and when you are constipated, eat more and more fibre, and that'll fix it. What's the evidence for all that?
Okay, let's first of all define what constipation is. So, as you know, because you've come to stay with me, I live not very far away from a place in the UK called Bristol, and there is actually something called the Bristol Stool Chart. And we're not talking kitchen furniture here, we're talking the stools that we can produce. And you can just pop it in and search it, and it's got a sort of list of 1 to 9. And it will say if you're up at number 1, that's what they define as extreme constipation. So if you're passing movements that look like little pellets, basically, almost kind of what a rabbit would do, that is how they would define extreme constipation. I think we should very much bring in the idea of what's normal and the idea of what's uncomfortable. So first of all, I don't think there is any normality when it comes to movements. We had a nutritionist in the UK a few years ago who had a television program, and it was called You Are What You Eat, and she became known as the poo lady, and she was quite obsessed with what was coming out of people. And her view, and she was vegan, she was very much plant-based. Her view was you should have a meal, and then a certain number of hours later you should be having a movement, and then a meal, and then a movement. And people are just not like that. So for some people, they go once a day. For some people, they go a few times a day. For some people, they go every couple of days. So long as you're not feeling discomfort, I would say don't think of it too much as constipation. So it's very much what's normal for you and what's comfortable for you. So if you are at the point, maybe you're at a 1 or 2 on the Bristol Stool Chart, or you are feeling discomfort, or perhaps you alternate between constipation and diarrhea, which could be indicative of something like irritable bowel syndrome, then if it starts becoming a problem for you, the question is more fibre going to help? And the simple analogy, the answer to that one is no. The simple analogy that I would use is if your sink is blocked, you are not going to put more stuff down the sink. And that is the exact analogy of if you are constipated, the idea that putting more fibre into the body is going to help is just the 180-degree complete opposite. If you're constipated, and I think we'll come on to this in other Q&As later, if you are constipated, there is a great study that shows that actually the best thing you can do is stop putting fibre in. So the sink is blocked, stop putting stuff into the sink. My best 2 tips for constipation, because it's absolutely not consume more fibre. 1, my normal advice on drinking is drink to thirst. This whole 8 glasses of water mantra is like 5 a day. It's just a number plucked out of thin air. It has no evidence base. But if you are constipated, you might want to just check how much you are drinking and maybe drink a little bit more, because your stools can absorb the water and it can then soften them and it can help. My single best tip for constipation is vitamin C. So the water-soluble vitamins are the 8 B vitamins and vitamin C. And by being water-soluble, they are lost from the body in water, basically. So that would be in urine, feces and sweat. So you might notice if, for example, you decide to take a B vitamin, that your urine will turn a fluorescent yellow if you take quite a high dose. And that is literally you urinating out the excess B vitamins beyond that your body wanted to absorb. Now, vitamin C more typically is excreted rather than urinated out. So if you're feeling constipated, you might want to start with 500 milligrams of vitamin C, and that's half a gram. Give it maybe 12 hours, give it a day. If the earth doesn't move for you, then you might want to go up to a gram. If things don't happen, you might want to go up to 1.5 grams. And I quite often talk with people about finding what we call your poo tolerance level of vitamin C. So there will be a level of vitamin C, and it will vary in the winter and the summer, because vitamin C is an immune nutrient. So you probably need more in the winter. But you will have a level at which you go very, very nicely, very, very comfortably, and you're getting a good level of vitamin C. Too much, you'll know, because you'll be running over to the toilet, and not enough, and you might be feeling a little bit constipated. So that's the way to sort constipation. It is not to put more waste down the sink.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay. Now, we hear a lot about grains and whole grains being essential, essential part of a healthy diet. Whenever you hear about people giving dietary advice, it's just, eat more, fruit and vegetables and whole grains. I mean, tell us about whole grains and what what effect they have, and because I think there's obviously different degrees of processing of grains and so on, which affect I think their carbohydrate content and their fiber content and so on. So give us a little quick 101 on grains.
Yeah. Whole grains do have more fiber than non-whole grains. And to a certain extent, that can go two ways. So the fiber lovers will tell you, eat your whole grains rather than your refined grains because they contain more fiber. If you are looking to come off fiber, and hopefully by the end of this presentation, particularly if people are feeling uncomfortable, they might actually make the choice to eat a lot less fiber. Sometimes if you're suffering from problems and you still want to eat carbohydrate for some reason I know not, then a good gastroenterologist would actually say you might want to start consuming white rice and white bread rather than brown rice and brown bread, because they are higher in fiber. So I went to a Cambridge reunion quite recently, and I met up with one of my colleagues who ended up as a top gastroenterologist in the UK. And I said, well, just as a matter of interest, I said, if people come into you, what's sort of the latest thinking? What's your advice? And he said, the first thing I would do is put people on a low fiber diet. And I said, that is just brilliant. I mean, that is just so encouraging.
Right.
He said, if they insist, if I can't get them off the carbohydrates, then it is white rice and not brown rice, and it is white bread and not brown bread. But, quite frankly, they're better off coming off those grains, and they're certainly better off coming away from the cruciferous vegetables. Now, I think this is going to, if you can, is that going into focus? Yep. Is that okay? Yeah. So what I did here, this is how the guidelines want us to get our 30 grams of fiber. So I actually got this from an article that was in the Guardian newspaper in 2019, and that's an awful newspaper.
Medical journal, yes.
Oh, the Guardian is just the worst. I mean, they're so anti-meat and they're so anti-cows. They would get rid of every cow in the world and not have us eating meat and dairy. So they put this up, but it was really handy because it was just before I was due to go over to Low Carb Denver and talk about fiber. So, as you can see, that the cereal companies have made it so. And we'll share all of this in the show notes afterwards, but they've made it so the whole grains are your best source of fiber. So we have this fictitious, we should consume this 30 grams of fiber, which is, a complete number plucked out of the air. And you look at it, and just 30 grams of a Kellogg's brand cereal gives you 5 grams of fiber versus something like a baked potato, where you've got about 1/10 of the fiber in the baked potato, which would actually be a real food. And if anyone were consuming real food and were consuming some carbohydrates, perhaps for exercise reasons, baked potato is one of your best carbohydrates to consume because it's not a grain. It is a sort of, starchy root vegetable. But they have really made it so you need to consume those whole grains to get your 30 grams of fiber. That's how they want us getting the fiber. And you end up eating things like bran flakes, which is a processed food, baked beans, which is a processed food, wholemeal bread, which can have 50 ingredients in it. I mean, not only is this a recipe for making cereal companies happy, it's a recipe for making all the fake food companies happy. I mean, you even have biscuits now where they'll say high fiber biscuit, high fiber muesli bar, because they're just trying to get people to consume more junk in the name of fiber. So I know we're going to come on later to alternative ways of getting fiber if that's what you want to do, but that's very much how the fake food world has set up the game so that it leads us to consume their high fiber fake foods. And of course, sorry, mustn't miss this point, because bran tastes so disgusting. If you ever go into a health food shop and just ask for a packet of 100% pure bran, it is literally sawdust. So when they put this stuff in cereal to disguise the taste, they have to put in a huge amount of sugar. So quite often your highest fiber cereals, those with the most raw bran in them, are the ones with the highest sugar. I mean, products like All Bran flakes, that kind of thing, they are often 20% sugar to disguise the taste of the bran.
So basically what you're saying is that that breakfast cereals are a combination of sugar and fiber, neither of which is much good for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Bang on.
So one of the criticisms that we often get when we promote this sort of low carb, diet, low carb eating, is that there's not enough fiber in a low carb diet. Which I mean, what's your response to that sort of criticism?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually that Guardian article that made me think. And as I say, I was preparing for doing a presentation. So again, I hope you can see this one and we can get this one over to you. When I was thinking about it, I developed this little thing which I call the carb fiber matrix. And I was trying to think about what it is that they're actually comparing. So in this box A up here, you've got foods that are high in fiber but low in carbohydrate. It's just a 2x2 matrix. In box B, you've got foods that are high in fiber and high in carbohydrate. In box C, you've got the low fiber, low carbohydrate. And in box D, you've got the low fiber, high carbohydrate. So what they end up comparing, and it was a sort of real penny drop moment for me when I realized this, because we'll come on to the evidence, I think, in a minute. But about the only evidence that they've got is what we call epidemiological studies. And the epidemiological studies are basically comparing people in box B with people in box D. So they're comparing people that eat the high fiber, high carbohydrate with people eating the low fiber, high carbohydrate. So they're comparing the people eating the brown bread and the legumes and the beans and pulses and starchy veg and high sugar fruits and so on with people who basically eat junk, cookies, high carb, low carbohydrate, just junk food basically. Now, of course, people are going to do better, or they're going to appear better in population studies if they are in that box B or consuming foods in box B rather than box D. But what they don't do is compare box B with box A. So they don't compare the people eating the whole grains, starchy vegetables, high sugar fruits with the people eating meat, fish, eggs and dairy, which are just far more nutritious, far less harmful for blood glucose levels, not providing any fibre. And we, of course, can go into box A, and we can explore that later if you like, where we're going high fibre, low carbohydrate, which is the kind of things that are okay on a low carb diet, non-starchy vegetables, lower sugar fruits, nuts and seeds and so on. But the reason that they get even any evidence showing that you're better off if you eat whole grains is because of what they're comparing it to, and they're not comparing it to us. If they want to compare the vegan with Anthony Chaffee, then I think Anthony Chaffee is going to compare pretty well. And I'm not saying we should all head over to being carnivore, but I know a lot of us in your world and in my world are at the very least low carb, if not keto, if not really quite controlled keto, looking after their diabetes. So that's what's going on. That's why they end up making it look like whole grains are something that are actually quite beneficial. But of course, they're not actually beneficial. They're comparing the wrong thing.
Right. Now, you just mentioned diabetes, and obviously, a lot of our listeners are people with type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes, or have concerns about family history of diabetes and so on. What about fibre and its effect on blood sugar? Because that's one of the things that's promoted, that if you improve digestion, you improve your blood sugar and so on. What's the facts? What does the research tell us about fibre and blood sugar?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is a perfect follow-on question from that previous one, because it comes down to what they're comparing it with. Now, if I tell you the kind of study that they use to say that fibre is better than something refined, you're going to have a few eyes rolling on the podcast at the moment. They will take a study where they give some people apples and they give some people apple juice, and they say apples contain fibre. And when we look at the impact on blood glucose levels and insulin spikes and so on, you're better giving people apples rather than apple juice. And that is then the evidence. And you think, no, you couldn't possibly have done that. That is just such a badly designed study. But that is exactly what they do. I mean, I could literally put in the show notes, here's the study comparing apples with apple juice. Now, what they don't do is to compare the apples with eggs, or apples with meat, or oily fish, or whatever. So it's always, again, it's because they've got this perspective that carbohydrates are marvelous. Protein is protein, fat is bad, carbohydrates are great, because they're so stuck in this paradigm of carbohydrates are marvelous. They can only ever compare carbohydrates with other carbohydrates, and that's why they get stuck in this paradigm and they can't see the wood for the trees. If they could break out of that and say, do you know what? Okay, so apples have a lower impact on blood glucose than apple juice. I wonder if eggs or yogurt would have an even lower impact. Wouldn't it be better having an egg for breakfast rather than an apple? And then they would realize that the egg has pretty much no impact on blood glucose whatsoever. It will have a bit of an impact on insulin, because protein, of course, impacts insulin. It's not just carbohydrate that impacts insulin. Protein has an impact, albeit a lesser impact. So that's the kind of thing that's going on there. They do not compare carbohydrates with foods that contain no carbohydrate, which are basically meat, fish, and eggs. Dairy starts to contain some carbohydrate. Hard cheese, very, very little. Fluid dairy, you're getting into a more significant intake of carbohydrate, which people who count carbs will know that. So you're looking at sort of 5 to 10% carb for fluid dairy. But that's where they get this idea from, that fibre is better than unrefined products. They're right, but they're not comparing it with something that's even better still.
Right. Okay. Now, can you have too much fibre? I mean, what happens when you have too much fibre?
Yeah, you can definitely have too much fibre. One of the things that they say about fibre is that, it will help everything move through the body quicker, which of course it doesn't if you're one of the people that we've been talking about with constipation. But even if it did, food provides us with nutrients, essential fats, complete proteins, vitamins and minerals. And I kind of think, well, I'm going to trust my body to move my food through at the right time for me, because I want my food to have all the nutrients extracted before it leaves the body. And I imagine that a carnivore will have very little waste to leave the body, because meat is very, very nutritious, lots of nutrients that the body wants to extract. At the point it's passed through the body, most of the nutrients have been stripped out and there's very, very little waste. Now, my absolute favourite study on this topic, I always thank two people for finding this study. I always like to give credit. And Ivor, the engineer, as I call him, Ivor the engineer, Ivor Cummins, alerted me to this study. And then your very own Paul Mason did a brilliant job. He took the study and he did a graphic for table 2 in this study. So the study is by Ho et al. And it's from 2012. And it's about stopping fibre and the impact on fibre. So it's a study from the Far East. And they took 63 people, which is a good number when you're doing an intervention study. And these poor people had the most chronic symptoms of bowel problems that you can imagine. So we're not just talking constipation, we're talking straining, we're talking anal fissures, we're talking things that would take you to the doctor. Some very, very serious issues related to extreme constipation. So the first thing they did with these 63 people was to say, okay, we're going to look at what the traditional advice is, which is we're going to give you more fibre. And things got worse. And they measured these people for those major chronic symptoms. So you've got this straining and severe discomfort, pain, etc. And they all got worse. So they said, right, we're going to reduce your fibre intake, and things started getting better. And then they said, we're going to stop your fibre intake. So that means they would have taken them down to an animal-based diet pretty much. And every single symptom in every single person disappeared. The bar chart that Paul put together is in a presentation. If you go on my site, there's a presentation where I put it in. It's just beautiful. And a number of them, at the end of the study, they basically said to the people, okay, do you want to go back on fibre? It's not going to surprise you to learn that not many people went back on fibre. Yes, we all know that carbs are quite addictive. It's not long before people are thinking, I really fancy an apple, and surely an apple is good for me. Surely a salad must be really nice with my steak. And they start reintroducing the fibre, and the symptoms might start returning in those people for whom fibre is just really an issue. So yes, you absolutely can consume too much fibre. And I think we have an explosion of bowel disorders, irritable bowel syndrome, discomfort, bloating. The first thing I would suspect in all of these people is that you're consuming foods that you're intolerant to. People might want to look into things like FODMAPs. There are certain vegetables, particularly cruciferous vegetables, that can be really quite abrasive to the gut. Keep a food diary, work out what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and then just stop eating the stuff that doesn't work for you. That would be my tip.
Yeah. I originally had a patient who was a plumber, ironically, and had a lot of plumbing problems. He had, he had a lot of bowel issues. Had probably more than an irritable bowel. Really, he probably had some serious bowel disorder, like Crohn's disease, something like that. And he well, fortunately, he was a plumber because he was never too far away from a toilet, but he couldn't be, and he was he was really struggling and had colonoscopies and so on. And then basically he read up some stuff and decided he would try a carnivore, a meat only diet. And within 2 or 3 days, all his symptoms completely resolved. He went from being someone who couldn't be more than 50 meters away from a toilet all day to leading a perfectly normal life. And that really opened my eyes, I must admit, to the impact of fibre that I probably had underestimated, really. So if there's this scientific evidence and then a lot of clinical experience that fibre is not great for us, how come it's in all the dietary guidelines that we've got to have lots of fibre?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to blame America, isn't it, for a few things in the world, but I think we should blame them for the dietary guidelines because they were the ones that first came out with some. And of course, we had the Senator McGovern committee in 1977, and they started meddling in, what should everyone eat? And then we had the 1980 dietary guidelines for Americans, and then they've come out every 5 years. So it was about 2005. They started talking about fibre targets first appeared, and they started mentioning this guideline of about 14 grams per 1,000 calories, which again is just like 5 a day and alcohol units and glasses of water. It's just a number picked out of the air. There's no scientific evidence behind it whatsoever. But they then kind of embedded that guide of 14 grams per 1,000 calories. So by the time you've got the 2015 to 2020 guidelines, you've literally got a little table where they're saying, okay, toddlers, boys and girls, they're probably only on about 1,000 calories, so they need 14 grams a day. Get up to a male, sort of 19 to 30, they're going to be on 2,500 to 3,000. So you just sort of scale up the that puts them on almost 35 grams of fibre a day, which you think about it is 7 bowls of all bran if you wanted to get your fibre all from the one source. I mean, it just doesn't bear thinking about. So these have become embedded in the guidelines over time. I mean, I have a bit of a sort of theory on this one because there is no evidence base, and I think we'll sort of come on to the evidence base in a minute. But because when you go back to which nutrients are essential, which essentially in nutrition means something we must consume, and fat and protein are essential, but carbohydrate isn't. And they've acknowledged that. I mean, it's in a document back as far as 2005, the panel of macronutrients, provided we eat enough fat and protein, carbohydrate is a non-essential nutrient. We have no requirement to consume carbohydrate whatsoever. And because, as I explained at the top of this, fibre is a subset of carbohydrate, the minute you realise that you've got no need to eat carbohydrate, you've got no need to eat fibre. But because they keep pushing carbohydrate, and not only do we not need it, they want it to be 55 to 60% of our diet because they've demonized fat so much. Imagine a little pie chart. Protein's in everything. So protein ends up being about 15% of any diet. The only other two things that we eat are fat and carbohydrate. So as soon as they demonize fat and say, right, you can't have more than 30% in the form of fat, immediately the rest of the pie is carbohydrate. So they're telling us to have 55% of our diet minimum in the form of the one macronutrient that we don't need. And I think even they have realized this is getting quite difficult to defend because we don't even need carbohydrate. So fiber comes to the rescue. If we can tell everyone we need fiber is a subset of carbohydrate. You only find fiber in carbohydrates. We've then got this sort of backdoor route to make sure we can beat everybody up for, are you getting enough fiber, which is just a euphemism for, are you eating the carbohydrate that we would like you to eat? That's my conspiracy theory anyway.
But surely these guidelines are supposed to be based on scientific evidence, are they not?
No, they're not. I looked at this. I mean, this is one of the things I love doing. I love maths and I'm really anal. So I love, I shouldn't say that in this topic, should I? I love systematic reviews. I love taking a topic and literally just looking at all the evidence. I'm not into cherry picking. I hate that. This study says this. I don't care. I want to look at the whole evidence. So the first thing you do is you look for randomized controlled trials. Because ideally you've got enough randomized controlled trials that you can then get to the top of the pyramid of evidence, which is a meta-analysis and systematic review of all of those randomized controlled trials. Well, people might be surprised to know that in the field of fibre, there is one RCT that is long enough and large enough that has actually looked at fibre. I mean, it's incredible. There's nothing to pull together. There's one RCT. Dates back to 1989. And it's called the DART trial, the Diet and Reinfarction trial. I actually know the person who presided over the trial, Professor Peter Elwood, lives just down the road from me in Cardiff. He was one of the adjudicators on my PhD and he's become a really good friend since. He's currently, I think, 95 and still knocking out papers on aspirin and fat and all the rest of it. He's just fabulous. Anyway, DART trial took 2,000 men in the Caerphilly area of Wales. So it's only been looked at in men. So we have no evidence for women whatsoever. Studied them over 2 years and it was an 8-way intervention, but you could look at the fibre impact within that intervention. They measured the two things that counted. So they measured mortality. There's no point getting less of one condition. What matters is deaths. So they measured all-cause mortality and CVD, cardiovascular disease mortality. And there were actually more deaths in the fibre group from all causes and from heart disease. Now, they didn't achieve statistical significance, but they were actually not far off clinical significance. You know, you're looking at 100 in one group versus 120 in the other group. It was really quite interesting, but it provided absolutely no evidence in support of fibre whatsoever. So you can't do a meta-analysis and systematic review. You then go to the Cochrane evidence. To cut the story short, there are 3 papers from the Cochrane. That was the gold standard until they chucked out Peter Brukner and developed industry influence like much of the other bodies. But they were the gold standard at this point. So there's 3 really good Cochrane reviews. They basically concluded, I think it was something like there were 20, let me see if I made a note of this, 21 outcomes, only 3 provided any evidence in favour of fibre. So immediately that's 18 that didn't provide any evidence. And the conclusion of the Cochrane teams was that we need more RCTs in this area. But of course, we didn't then go out and do RCTs. We just keep regurgitating this epidemiology. So we have so much epidemiology. We even have what's called an umbrella review, which is a meta-analysis of meta-analyses. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's pooling together all the pooling togethers of all the population studies. That's how many population studies we've got. It's ridiculous how many we've got. But of course, population studies have 3 fundamental flaws. They're association, not causation. They will trumpet relative risk. They'll say, oh, it's a 10% difference. And it ends up being an absolute risk difference of 1 in 1,000. And then we have this massive issue in the world of fibre and population studies, which is the healthy person confounder. And it ends up with you asking the question, okay, so they found an association between healthy people and people who eat fibre, but does that mean that healthy people eat fibre or fibre makes people healthy? I think healthy people eat fibre because they're the ones who can afford fruit and vegetables and nuts and seeds and quinoa and Jerusalem artichokes and all that kind of thing. It's the people on the meal deals down in that box D with the junk food. Those are the less privileged who can't afford the fibre, but it's not fibre that made them unhealthy. It's their affluence and their deprivation in life.
So basically, what you're saying is that there is no evidence to support the dietary guidelines promoting fibre as essential. So, I mean, how do we reverse that? I mean, surely that can't continue. I mean, they revise these guidelines every 5 years in the US, and we're actually undergoing a revision at the moment in Australia, and I don't have a lot of confidence that that's going to be done very well. But surely this can't continue. That the fact that there's zero evidence for these guidelines and these promoting fibre.
I think it will continue because there's actually zero evidence for virtually every public health dietary guideline. So we know the fat guideline is wrong. We know things like avoid dietary cholesterol was rejected by Ansel Keys back in the 1950s. You know, that should never have got off the ground. We know that the alcohol units are wrong. We know demonizing coffee is wrong. We know that every dietary guideline that comes out is wrong. My opinion, I do not think they're going to reverse it. So I often talk about a sort of pyramid, and I would absolutely love if they came in at the top of the pyramid and just said, guys, I'm so sorry, we got it wrong. And then you can cascade down good guidelines. That would be the fastest way to transform the health of human beings across the planet. That is not going to happen because of vested interests. It's also not going to happen because the person who comes out with that is actually opening up the government and other bodies, the dietetic bodies, to lawsuits. Because the minute that happens, I would turn around if I were a type 2 diabetic and say, you made me diabetic. You've been telling me to eat low fat, high carb. I did that diligently. I had my apple juice like you told me to, and I ended up obese and with type 2 diabetes. So I'm suing you now because you've just admitted that you were wrong. So it's not going to happen. So at the bottom of the pyramid is what you and I are a part of, which is the bottom-up revolution of people working it out for themselves, people spreading it among their friends and family. So they bump into somebody like you did. I mean, you transformed your own health. And then you shared with me that people will go, oh my goodness, Peter, you look amazing. What have you done? And then you tell them, and then they go away and try it, and then they do it. Now, partway up the pyramid is the bar that we're very excited about. And that's what you're doing, which is if you can get doctors partway up the pyramid to realize that they were wrong and that they were giving the wrong advice, they can then influence 1,000 people below them, because doctors do have that kind of number of patients who go to them for advice. So the best thing would be at the top, but it's not going to happen. So the next best thing is to get doctors such as you, David Unwin, Ian Lake, you know, all the good people that you've just been recently meeting with, those good people, to then realize it was wrong, and then they can get a lot of people into the bottom-up revolution in one fell swoop.
It's very, very hard because everyone, you know, as we've said, everyone is just so convinced that that fibre is and carbs, but we're talking about fibre mainly today, is essential and so important. I mean, people often talk about the gut microbiome these days. You know, it's sort of a buzz term, isn't it? You know, and you know that you need fibre for the sake of your gut microbiome, and there's this gut brain axis and all that sort of stuff. And what's your response to those people?
Yeah, I mean, well, going back to the first principle, given that we don't need fibre, it cannot be important for gut health. It cannot be vital. So the question you're then asking is it good in any way? Go back to first principles and say, what makes for a great gut microbiome? And for some of us, it's a bit too late to take on board some of the first things that I'm going to say. But if you've got any children coming along in your family, take note now. What makes for a great gut microbiome? It's something that's with you throughout life. So first of all, it would have been great if you could choose your parents, because you should choose your parents to be as healthy as possible. Secondly, it's very important that mum gives birth naturally. And I do appreciate that there are circumstances where babies need to be sort of got out under an emergency cesarean, but I do worry about the number of elective cesareans that are going on at the moment, because the baby coming out naturally is bathed in the mother's microflora, and that is an excellent start in life. Then again, some people, breastfeeding is difficult, but breastfeeding is a massive transference of fantastic gut flora into the infant. Things that then you can more easily do something about. Don't take antibiotics, especially as a child, unless your life depends on it. Ditto as an adult, unless your life depends on it. Eat real food. Don't eat fake food. We know from studies like the Super Size Me documentary, you can destroy a microbiome with a fake food diet in about 4 weeks. So eat good stuff, don't eat bad stuff. And then within that, eat good stuff. Do you need to be eating beans on toast? No, absolutely not. Some of the best things that you can be consuming are low carb and low or zero fiber. So fermented foods, fermented yogurts, fermented cheeses, feta on your salad, Kefir in the morning. A lot of people make their own kefir or make their own yogurt with natural cultures that are going to repopulate your gut. And then just avoiding medications that will impact your gut, like omeprazole. Trying to lower the acidity in your gut is never a great idea. So there is so much that we can do. And trust me, beans on toast is really absolutely bottom of the pile. It's going to do nothing good whatsoever. It might be quite abrasive.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, we've got lots and lots of questions, so I'll try and get through. I can't promise to get through all of them, but let's tackle one. The first one says, my dad says he can't go a day without all bran for breakfast. What can we get him to eat instead?
Well, does Dad need to change? Would be my first question. Could Dad sort of do low carb but include that all bran? Has Dad got obesity or type 2 diabetes? Is there a reason that you need to take him off his all bran? Because if Dad is not constipated, if he's not bloated, if he's not uncomfortable, if he doesn't have diabetes, if he doesn't have to avoid all bran, now that you know it's 20% sugar, literally think every spoon of all bran you take, the 5th spoon is just going in the white sugar bowl. That's what all bran is. If none of that is a problem, then I just say leave Dad alone. If Dad does need to make some changes, that could be the last thing that you change. You could say, okay, Dad, you now need to be moving to steak or fish or eggs and salad for your evening meal rather than a pasta or starchy food-based thing. You need to be moving away from sandwiches for lunch, but maybe you're allowed that carb all bran breakfast if that really has established a routine for him that works. I'm not a black and white person at all. If there's something that's working for people, it's all about balance and what overall are you trying to achieve.
Yep, fine. Okay. Question from Claire. I'm a diabetic of 16 years on metformin. They say you take fibre at your evening meal and it will help regulate your blood sugar. I want to get off tablets and lose weight. So what about fibre and blood sugar?
We're back to the apples and the apple juice. So quick guideline on blood glucose, because again, this was a penny drop moment for me when I first realized this. In our entire bloodstreams right now, we have 1 teaspoon of glucose. It's about 4 to 5 grams, ideally nearer 4, even than 5. 1 teaspoon of glucose. Now, the minute we put in more than that, the body detects it as an emergency situation and needs to get it out of the bloodstream. So if the dietitians or whatever saying, have some fibre before you go to bed or whatever, presumably they're talking about a bowl of cereal or a slice of whole grain bread. Let's just take that bowl of cereal. Even a small bowl of cereal is going to have something like, 20 grams of sugar. Now back to those single sugars, some of it might be fructose. Most of it in cereal is going to be glucose. If you have an apple before going to bed, let's say you have a 20-gram apple, that's probably a good example. You think of an apple as healthy, not too heavy before bed. 20 grams of sugar in that apple, approximately 10 grams is going to be fructose, approximately 10 grams is going to be glucose. Just think about the glucose for now. I mean, the fructose, by the way, goes to the liver, and that's when you end up with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, if you want to know what fructose is doing to you. Yeah. The 10 grams of glucose are going into the bloodstream. Now, let's assume you had a good, stable blood glucose level of around 4 grams. Just immediately, you've chucked in 10 grams. The body will then call upon the pancreas to release insulin to go and mop up that 10 grams of glucose. It wants to get the glucose back to where it was. So your blood glucose was stable. It was stable. And then you went and put in a carbohydrate with fibre in it and you made it unstable. And you gave this body this massive exercise to do to get the glucose out of your bloodstream. If you want to keep your blood glucose stable, don't eat anything. Seriously, just don't put anything in your mouth. If you're hungry and you want to keep your blood glucose stable, then eat something that doesn't contain carbohydrate, which is meat, fish, or eggs, or hard cheese going within the dairy group. But the idea that dietitians talk about regularly topping up your blood glucose level, that's what your body does. That is the role of the pancreas. That is the role of glucagon and insulin. Just leave it well alone. Stop chucking food in every 5 minutes, ideally no more than 2 or 3 times a day, and it will do what it's designed to do.
Great. Okay, I hope that answers your question, Claire. Question from Helen. I was told that it was important to manage my cholesterol as a diabetic and that low saturated fat and high fibre is the best way to manage that cholesterol. What about fibre and cholesterol?
Well, we could come back and do a whole other hour on cholesterol, couldn't we?
Don't get us started on cholesterol.
No, don't worry. I won't get you in any trouble. Right, quick headline on cholesterol. Cholesterol is so utterly life vital that our bodies are making it right now. It is not even an essential nutrient, as in we don't need to get it from food. It is too important to the body for the body to rely on us to get it from food. So it's not going to rely on us getting from food. We are making it in the body. So dietitians do think fat is bad and they do think cholesterol is bad. Those are whole different topics. They're completely ignorant. There is no evidence for either of those. And that was the core heart of my PhD. So I do actually know what I'm talking about in that respect. Now, because they want to lower cholesterol, which is wrong, but because they do, they tell you to eat more fibrous foods. They probably don't know how and why fibrous foods lower cholesterol, and they don't know the consequences of it. And I did this as a paper during my PhD, and it's got nothing to do with saturated fat. So I'll just see if I can tie all of this together in a quick 1 minute, because there might be another question. So you eat some fibrous foods. Let's say you have vegetable oils or you have some whole grains. They contain substances called plant sterols, which is kind of like plant cholesterol in effect. And when we consume those, they compete in the gut with our human cholesterol and they replace it to an extent. So that ends up lowering our blood cholesterol level because in effect it's replaced it with some plant sterols. Now I kind of think if my body is making human cholesterol, it's making what it needs. It doesn't actually want plant cholesterol instead, but hey, that's just the way my mind works. But it will lower your cholesterol by having put plant sterols into the body. So what they say is, oh, because you've reduced your saturated fat, you reduced your cholesterol. No, I still do not know, in about 20 years of looking in detail at diet and health and academic papers galore, I do not know how saturated fat can raise or lower cholesterol. I do not know a mechanism by which that happens. I think that is a complete red herring when it comes to cholesterol. And I can give you a brilliant dismissal on that for another day. What happens if you tell people to lower their saturated fat, and saturated fat is in everything from strawberries to steak, but they would tend to consume fewer animal foods because saturated fat is a bit richer in animal foods than other foods. So they consume less of those, more of the plants foods, so more plant sterols, so they lower cholesterol. And then people go, oh, look, it was because you lowered your saturated fat. No, it wasn't. It was because you ate more fibrous foods and you ate plant sterols, and that's what's lowered your cholesterol. So the paper I did in my PhD in 2014, if you Google Harcombe Baker plant sterols, you'll find the paper very short, very readable. I said, okay, so if you lower your cholesterol by consuming plant sterols, is that a good thing? Is that a good thing when it comes to outcomes? So I want to look at mortality and I want to look at heart disease. And the answer is no. You increase your risk of dying from all causes, you increase your risk of dying from heart disease. And I also came across a couple of papers that looked at cancer, and it's like, it's not so good for cancer either. So you don't want to be doing that. If you've got a doctor nagging you about your cholesterol, you might think, oh, I know plant sterols lower it. I'll go down a health food shop, I'll get some plant sterols and I'll lower my cholesterol just before my blood test or whatever. Yeah, you can do that, but know that you are harming your health in the process. You're going to keep your doctor happy and worsen your own health outcomes. How could that be sensible?
Sure. Okay, great. Question from Sue. Postmenopausal and menopausal women are told that fibre is essential for fat loss, reducing menopausal symptoms and pelvic floor health, presumably to avoid constipation. We're told fibre is necessary for gut health, feeling full and reducing craving. So what is the truth? Let's focus on menopausal and postmenopausal women then.
Yeah, we're no different. Menopausal women, postmenopausal women, premenopausal women, younger women, older women, men, we're no different when it comes to fibre. There is zero requirement for fibre. So I think a lot of the time there are things said to menopausal women, you know, they're going through a bad enough time as it is without starting nagging them about carbohydrate intake and fibre intake. We've addressed the gut issues, and, you know, hopefully Sue is convinced that we don't need fibre for a healthy gut. You should be having fermented products and all the rest of it. So let's just address the feeling full and avoiding cravings. And I think it was sort of fat loss as well. In terms of feeling full, there might be something in that, because I imagine if you fill yourself up with some sort of lentil dal or bean curry or something, I imagine you're going to bloat. So I think you're going to feel quite full, but I think you're going to feel quite uncomfortable at the same time. It's not a real fullness that you get from having had a really satisfying meal of some oily fish and some non-starchy vegetables or something. There's no way that it will reduce cravings. The only foods that we crave, I believe, somebody out there might crave a lamb chop. I've not met that person, but the foods that we crave are carbohydrates. Of course, you now know that fibre is a subset of carbohydrate. So if you're consuming any fibre, you're consuming carbohydrates. If they're telling you to have cereals or brown bread, a lot of people feel addicted to those. So they're not going to reduce your cravings. Having something that you crave is not going to reduce your cravings for that thing. If you crave something, you need to stop eating it, and then the cravings will disappear. And in terms of the fat loss, I mean, that is just utterly ridiculous. We could do a whole session on weight loss and the circumstances that you need to be in for weight loss. But to cut that story very short, essentially for the body to use body fat for fuel, which is what weight loss actually is. That's the definition of weight loss. It's not a calorie deficit. It is the body actually breaking down body fat. And the body will only do that if it doesn't have alternative fuel available. And of course, the fuel that most people have available all the time is carbohydrate, either in carbohydrate that they've just eaten or in stored carbohydrate, which is that word glycogen that we heard at the top of the hour. So if you've got glycogen or just eaten carbohydrate recently, you've got an alternative fuel source. So the body not only doesn't need to break down body fat, it can't break down body fat because you're in the environment where it's got an alternative fuel source. The other thing that stops the breakdown of body fat, because the breakdown of body fat needs glucagon, the hormone from the pancreas, to be activated to break down body fat. Insulin is the fat storing hormone. So insulin and glucagon are not in play at the same time. So if you eat carbohydrate and you've therefore got insulin in your bloodstream because you're trying to take the carbohydrate out of the bloodstream, you've got no opportunity for glucagon to be doing its thing. So if you've got insulin sloshing around your system, you literally cannot lose weight. You cannot activate glucagon. You cannot lose fat. So I hope that helps, Sue.
Yep,
don't worry about what they tell you.
No, exactly. All right. Look, so we've just about run out of time. So I just thought we'd just have give you the last word and just say, if you had, sort of 30 seconds to tell the public the truth about fibre, what would you, in a couple of sentences, what would you say?
Oh, okay. Okay, so essential in nutrition means something that we must consume. There are essential fats, there are essential proteins, there are no essential carbohydrates. Fibre is a subset of carbohydrate. De facto, there is no requirement for fibre whatsoever. We could end there, but the next question we should ask is, if we don't need it, is it good for us? And the short answer is no. There may be a relationship between people who eat fibre and health, but I would suggest that's because people who eat fibre might be healthy. Fibre is not making people healthy.
Fantastic. Right. Well, Zoe, look, thank you so much for tonight. I think it's been absolutely fascinating, and we really appreciate your time. I know how busy you are, and yeah, thank you for coming on from the other side of the world. We really appreciate it. So that's
thank
great.
you for having me, and be nice to our boys down under, won't you? Not that there are many Wales boys in the Lions, but
no, there's a bit of a so Zoe and her husband Andy are big Welsh rugby fans. So
not anymore. It's too depressing at the moment.
Right, they're almost as bad as Australia. So thank you, Zoe. Really appreciate it. And look, to our audience, if tonight has challenged what you thought about fibre, you're not alone. I mean, nutrition advice is so confusing, and that's exactly why we created the Defeat Diabetes program, to try and sort of clear up all the confusion. We've really built it to help people cut through the noise, to understand the science and take practical steps to improve their health, especially when it comes to blood sugar and metabolic health. So if you're feeling inspired to take that next step, we've got our mid-year offer running straight away. So end of financial year offer. head to defeatdiabetes.com.au/sale or /offer, and you can check that out. We'd love to support you on your journey, and it will do wonders for your health. So thanks again for tuning in, and thanks again to Zoe, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Good night.